Away, ay, 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 ay. Away up, away up, ay, 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 ay. Ay, 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 ay. Away, ay, 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 ay. Away, ay, 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 ay.
Welcome back to the second hour of The Bridge with Kira. We are totally going to switch gears here from the activist conversation that we were having earlier. And I am going to welcome back Susane Posel to The Bridge. Welcome back, Susane.
Thank you for having me back.
I know that you've been digging into some stuff that you wanted to talk about, and it's always incredibly informative and interesting to have a conversation with you. So I'm glad that you were able to make it.
Absolutely. The whole idea of Russia hacking into our election, and I don't know if you got a chance to see the Washington Post article that came out yesterday afternoon about how the Obama administration was dealing with it, why they chose to react publicly the way that they did. Did you get a chance to see that?
No, I didn't.
It's amazing. Go read it. It's a really long. It's like a novella, but it's definitely worth the read.
Okay.
But one of the things I want to talk about concerning our last election is that talking point that always comes up, and it's usually from the right, as far right as the darkest recesses of the internets, that, well, voting tallies, the actual votes, they weren't flipped. So how could Russia have possibly influenced the election? They didn't actually change the votes. I'm sure you've heard this 1,000 times before, right?
Yes.
Well, that's really difficult to do. I don't know if people listening in America realize, but when we vote for our president, we don't go through one national vote. We go through about 9,000 individual votes. All of the different states, all of the different districts, they all get together, and between 9,000 individual different districts and precincts, we're all voting independently. And then that independent vote is then tallied for the national purpose, the reason for voting for the president of the United States. But we're all going through these 9,000 individual votes. Well, that's a good thing, especially when Russia might be meddling in our election, because it's very difficult to hit all of those 9,000 different voting elections that are going on, because they have some similarities in some of the software that they use, but they all are conducted differently. Some of them very differently. So it's very difficult to go through that and figure out how to individually get in there long enough to flip votes. What Russia decided to do was something much easier. And going all the way back to the primaries, not just election day, but going back to the primaries, they were doing this. And what they were doing, Arizona and Illinois have admitted this publicly, that Russians went in and flipped voter registration information.
Wow.
So what does that mean, right? That means who you are registered, what your party is. And in some states, like in New York, you cannot vote outside of your registration. So if you're registered for a Democrat and your vote registration is flipped or your voter information is messed with, then when you get to the polls, you are not allowed to vote. That actually happened in the primaries. 125,000 New Yorkers who were registered Democrats were not allowed to vote because among the flipping of the votes, people's voter registration magically disappeared. And that 125,000 number that I just quoted, that was the number of people in New York alone who their voter registration magically disappeared and they were not able to vote in the primary.
Wow.
Now, a lot of these were Bernie supporters, but some of them were Trump supporters. And we know this because they made videos about it. And they talked about it. And they showed their voter registration information. In fact, on my show, I played a clip from a boy, not a boy, a young man. I'm almost 40, so everybody's a kid to me. And he goes by Jace NYC. He actually, in the beginning of the video, because my show doesn't have any visuals, I cut this part out, but he shows his voter registration papers and then what it says on the screen. On his paper, it says Democrat. On the screen, it says Republican. And then he plays the audio of the call he made to the New York Board of Elections, where the woman confirms, oh, it's been changed. Your paperwork does say Democrat, but for some reason you're in the computer system as a Republican. Well, let me get that changed right away. What's a good number where we can call you back and get this fixed? Not enough New Yorkers were like Jace NYC in doing that. They didn't know. You know, when you go to register, you just register and you never think about it. You don't think that you should check on it. It's not like your account. You're not online checking your balance every 5 minutes to make sure you have money, right? This is your voter registration. You do it probably when you get your license, your driver's license, and you never think about it again. But these people, 125,000, were ineligible to vote because theirs magically disappeared. Jace was lucky where his just got flipped. But it's not just in New York. This happened, according to a Bloomberg article that came out last week. 39 states had voter registration information flipped, hacked into, magically disappeared, or altered in some way. And last week, it didn't get very much coverage, but it was important. DHS officials spoke with the Senate Intelligence Committee headed by Richard Burr on the Republican side, the chairman, and Mark Warner, the ranking Democrat. And among other crazy things that they said about Russia and our election last year, they admitted to 21 states. So Bloomberg reported 39, DHS admitted to 21 states. But they didn't tell us which ones. Now, I want to go back to what happened in New York because that was during the primary. When I first heard about this, they weren't talking about Jace or the 125,000 because there's so many things going on. It's when you're reporting on this, it's difficult to remember every little thing that happened back a year ago that you were reporting on. But I tend to do that. When I hear information, I tend to realize, wait a minute, I talked about something like this a year ago or 2 years ago. Maybe it has more relevance now than it did then. And when I looked back at my reporting, not just for my show, but for my website, occupycorporatism.com, I went back and looked at the sources that I had quoted, and there were lots of videos back then during the primary. In New York, specifically, it became a huge issue, and there were lots of articles written about this. But because state elections or states themselves, when it comes to elections, they don't really want to get the reputation that their elections aren't safe or sound. So they don't really share information. Not only is it decentralized, not only do we have 9,000 different elections going on simultaneously when we vote for president, but they don't really talk to each other. So it's good in the decentralization, fact that if you're Putin, it's going to be difficult to hack in individually. It would be a lot easier if it was just one giant national election and you could just hit that and it would all be over. But in New York, go ahead.
What's the advantage to Russia doing this if it's affecting both Democrats and Republicans?
Here's the advantage. In New York, mostly Bernie supporters were affected by what happened. And Hillary immediately in the news was blamed for Bernie's loss of the nomination because he should have won in these counties. He should have won, and because of that, he should have gotten more electoral votes. And there was a souring of sentiment against Hillary Clinton at that time. And it just so happened that the DNC emails where some of the emails were disparaging toward Bernie Sanders in conversations with Hillary Clinton and DNC members. Those emails just so happened to emerge or come up to the surface several months later during the election.
Mm-hmm.
And what I surmise is, if you're going to have something that has to grow, like planting a tree or a flower, you need to do it ahead of time, right? Especially if it's a vegetable garden. There are certain times of the year where you have to plant, and it will come to fruition in 3 or 4 months, or it'll come to fruition later on in the October harvest. And so when the primaries, when they flip the voter registration information from Democrat to Republican, from independent to gone, they created a seed of ill sentiment toward Hillary Clinton because she was immediately blamed for it. When it was Russia who did it, Russia prevented Bernie Sanders supporters largely from voting in the primary. Now, they took that angry sentiment and regurgitated it back out when they released the DNC emails concerning Debbie Wasserman Schultz, concerning Hillary Clinton, and disparaging conversations about Bernie Sanders. And what that did was everybody who couldn't vote in the primary, everybody who was who didn't know that their registration had been flipped and were just denied at the polls, or in some other way were not able to get their vote tallied so that their voice could be heard. Then when they hear later on, oh, this was all a plot from Debbie Wasserman Schultz and Hillary Clinton, and they had it in for Bernie, and that's why he lost the primary. Well, when it becomes a race between Trump and Hillary, if you've already got a bad taste in your mouth and you're already pissed off that your dude lost because that woman did something to the voter registration to make it so that people couldn't vote, and at the time we didn't realize it was Russia, and we didn't realize what they actually did, you would not want to vote for her. 47% of the registered voters in the United States voted in our last election.
Mm.
So it makes total sense, doesn't it? I mean, you hate her because she won over your boy, right? You wanted Bernie, and she got the nomination because she got more electoral votes. Because in reality, less people for Bernie were able to vote because their voter registration was flipped. Russia did that. Then they came back a couple of months later and reminded people, remember that woman who took that primary nomination away from your man? Now she wants to be your president. And oh, here's what she said about your boy. Don't you just hate her?
Mm.
And it works. That's how you change sentiment. That's how you get people to stay at home. That's how you get people to say, well, you know what? F her, I'm voting for the angry orange.
Or I'm not voting at all because they're both suck, you know.
And there's another way that they did this, and this was during our actual election. In Dallas County, Texas, the most Democratic county in Texas, known to have the most Democratic voters in that concentrated area. They were hit 17 times with ISPs that are directly traceable to Russia. ISPs that were put out by the FBI months ago. When they told the state elections, if you remember back in August later on, the news reports were saying the DHS and the FBI were letting the state elections boards know it's possible that if you have any of these IP addresses, if you can check to see if any of them have done any backdoor activity, that would be a connection to Russia. Let us know. In that, Arizona and Illinois did admit to that, but in Dallas County, Texas, in the most Democratic county in the state, that was a shoo-in. Hillary spent a lot of money, spent a lot of time down there. 17 IP addresses were found, and they were using a program that doesn't tally votes. It organizes voter registration information. And it's important, especially on election day, that those programs are working, because when you walk in and hand in your voter registration and they look at it against their records and it's a match, that's what the purpose of that software is for. So you can get it into the ballot station and do your business. But if it doesn't match, there's a discrepancy. You have to wait in line or stand, or you might never even get to vote. And in Dallas County, Texas, that exactly happened. The software failed. 17 IP addresses directly connected to Russia were found to have been in their system. And when it failed, they had to go to paper ballots, which meant longer lines, which meant less turnout, which meant less votes. That's how you do it, folks. Now, the right would love to tell you because they didn't change the actual tally at the time when you press the button and you went for Hillary, it went to Trump, or vice versa, because that didn't happen, then nothing happened. But that's playing on the idea that they think you're stupid. There are other ways to do it. And it's a lot easier to stop somebody from doing something than completely to stop them from entering the building. It's a lot easier than in midstream while they're doing it to mess with it, because we have 9,000 different elections going on simultaneously on that day. It's impossible. So they did the other easy thing. And when we look at what they did in the primaries, they caused a situation that later led to angry sentiment when it came time for the real vote for president, not just in the primary for the Democratic nominee. This is incredible. And guess what? The dump regime has done nothing to secure our election system since then. Kellyanne Conjob was on CNN, and she tried to twist it into blaming Obama or blaming the Democrats that he won the election fair and square. Well, there's evidence that he didn't. Because maybe if those people had voted, how would they have voted? If they were able to get through and get into the ballot and cast their vote, how would they have voted? Because a lot of people during the primary were barred from voting. And I'm talking about hundreds of thousands of people, not just in New York, but all over the country. And then when it came time for election day. So because of the voter registration files and information being flipped and being disappeared, we don't know. We can't even answer that question. We don't know. Not everybody's voice was heard. And I really think it's important that people understand this at this point in the Trump-Russia saga. Because we just had 5 special elections. Now, between the gerrymandering and the voter registration information being flipped, can we say that those elections were fair and square? How many people are aware that their voter registration was possibly flipped? How many people went back and double-checked and corrected the information? How many people before 2018, when we vote for many seats in the House could be flipped to Democrats? But between gerrymandering and people not knowing whether or not their voter registration is what they say it is, or what they filled it out to be, especially if you live in a state where you have to vote per your registration. You cannot vote outside party line, like New York. We need to fix this. The dump regime says, oh, it's not a big deal. We've got some voter thing going on with Mike Pence, but would it be in Mike Pence's best interest to fix the problem if it worked so well last year?
Yeah. Not really.
Yeah, it's like with the healthcare thing going on. We're going to have to fight for our lives. We are going to have to fight for our elections. We have to contact our state representatives and our elections boards. And we need to contact our local media and force them to go to their offices and get them on the record. And embarrass the crap out of them if we have to. Make YouTube videos making fun of their responses. We need to shame them if we have to into doing something about this. 2018 is right around the corner. My kids just got off for summer vacation. Before I know it, they're going to be going back to school in September. Before you know it, you're going to be voting. Are our elections safe? Is Russia going to do it again? Will they be enabled to do it again? Here's one thing, going back to the Senate Intelligence Committee, when they talked to the DHS officials this week, one of the questions that they asked, Susan Collins, a Republican, asked this question: will they do this again? Did they leave loopholes or backdoors to make it easier for them to get back in? Do you know what DHS said to her?
Mm-mm.
No comment. What that means is, I can't tell you in a public setting. I'll tell you back in private when we talk. That means there's a problem that is not being addressed by this administration, and I personally don't think it's in their best interest to address it. And that's a problem. Because if we don't vote, if we don't choose our electors, our representatives to vote, to represent us in the state and federal level, are we a democracy?
Yeah. Well, and there's not only that question on everyone's mind, but will there ever be any consequences? The other question on our minds about all of this. People can't even get their heads around what actually happened, much less what sort of consequence there should be. So the last time we spoke, Comey had just got fired. And since we spoke, I think he testified in front of Congress. I didn't catch it. I don't know if there was anything
oh, wow. Really? I had my popcorn ready.
Did you? So what was revealed? What were the eye-opening remarks that he made that day?
The interesting thing is that it was the president's tweet saying, hey, you better hope there aren't any tapes of our conversations before you go leaking to the press about us. That prompted Comey to say, I better get my side of the story out there. So he gave this memo that he wrote. It's not classified. It's not government information. It was written by him for personal purposes. And so he gave this to one of his friends, a Columbia Law University professor, who leaked it to the press. And that prompted the special counsel. And he said in testimony that he was hoping that would happen. Because what we have is a dictator who is going around asking people, hey, tell everybody I'm not being investigated. He went to Comey, Jimmy Too Tall. He says no. He goes to Dan Coates, a man who was a surrogate during his campaign, and he happened to give the job of national intelligence director. Dude says, yeah, I can't do that. So he goes to Mike Rogers, who was not liked in the NSA and averted firing during the Obama administration, only to keep his job with Donald Trump, even though everybody agreed that he was doing a terrible job. So obviously he owes his job to Donald Trump. He, in testimony in front of the Senate Intelligence Committee, said that he wouldn't comment on his conversations, but he never felt intimidated to do anything, even though he was asked to do something. And then when it was in closed doors, he went into more detail about what was actually said. And it was basically the same thing. Hey, can you tell everybody I'm not being investigated personally? Well, at the time when Comey left the FBI, he wasn't under investigation personally. But because he fired Comey and then talked about tapes, now he is being investigated by the FBI and Special Counsel Robert Mueller personally for obstruction of justice.
Yeah. Isn't that something?
He is his own problem, reaction, solution. It's all mixed up, right? In that big sack of rancid slab meatloaf. It's bubbling up in there in that KFC-shaped idiot that's running our country. He does this to himself. He's the embodiment of that song from the 90s, I Am My Own Worst Enemy.
Mm-hmm.
Every time he does something like this, I hear that song in the back of my head because he does this to himself. Because he's in charge, we might not know to the extent of his connections with Russia or to the extent that his campaign colluded, because he has the ability to create difficulties and extend things. And if he's in there for 4 years, then he could just draw this out. But it's going to be us. And I think that, like I was saying before, with elections coming up, it's really important that you understand what I was talking about. And go back after the show when Kira puts it up on YouTube and listen to it again and call your representatives on the state level and the federal level and get this fixed. Call the Board of Elections in your state and make sure they are aware of this and find out what they're doing and get updates and keep talking to them and maybe show up with a bag of bagels and some balloons and ask to speak to them. And get this on record and call your local news stations and get them to go out and ask what they're doing about this. Because this needs to be fixed. If Russia's going to do it again, they already have the ability to do that. They have the loopholes and the back doors already set. They have the key. All they have to do is come back.
And not enough people that know what's going on to where it could work a second time.
It would be, if people are not aware of their voter registration being flipped or being disappeared, and I would assume that the people who went to the polling stations and found out, and people during the primaries who found out, knew this and had this rectified. But those who didn't realize this, go online and make sure that you are registered for the party that you want. Especially if you live in a state where you have to vote along party lines. You will not be able to vote in 2018 and 2020. And that's important. You know what else is important? Republicans, there was a firm that was hired by the RNC to help Donald Trump, and they helped during the campaign. They, for 12 days, had this document on it that had over 200 million registered voter registration information, everything from your name to how you feel about stem cell research, how you feel about abortion, how you feel about gun rights, how you feel about jaywalking. And this information sat online for 12 days. And if you had the URL, then you could just come and take it. It was an unsecured server on Amazon on the cloud. And it sat there for 12 days. 200 million registered voters in this country. That's more than half. We have 325 million people. It's more than half of the people who live in this country. Their information was out there for anyone to take. And wouldn't it be convenient if you wanted to help maybe your pals in Moscow and get them information on the down low where nobody would suspect, because who's monitoring Amazon cloud servers? I don't know.
Right.
And just leave it up there. And then maybe the URL passes around. Maybe you email them or text them with just the URL or whatever. And then all of a sudden, the URL gets around to the point where the media gets a hold of it. Well, if the media got a hold of it, you can best believe a lot of other people got a hold of it, not just your intended person or persons, but hackers, but anybody. I mean, if you want to get crazy about it, you could think about it in terms of identity theft. Oh my gosh, your personal information was sitting there for 12 days. Nobody said anything. Nobody took it down. And this URL was being circulated to the point where it hit the media. Obviously, it wasn't a secret. If Russia got a hold of that, well, guess what? They now have lots of information to target people specifically with the fake news that they targeted people during our election. And 2018 is extremely important because we have the chance to flip the House. and send the Republicans, home, maybe permanent vacation. Who knows? They could go and visit the Vatican and see Billy O'Reilly.
That would be, wow. Yeah. So it begs the question too, why are we continuing to use this system that can be hacked? Why isn't all of these software security geniuses on this? Why?
The assumption is that when you have a system, you have it secured. And so everybody who has a computer or a laptop knows you can have an operating system, but then you have to download a security system. Like, I can't think of one right now, but
Norton,
you know what I mean?
Antivirus.
McAfee.
Yeah.
Yeah, an antivirus. You have to download that to protect. It doesn't automatically come on your computer unless you have like a Windows, an HP computer or a Microsoft computer. They usually have a built-in, but you have to go and download one yourself. And it's the same thing with the software for these elections. The software itself is independent of the protections that you need. And protections cost money. And if you just spent a bunch of money on the software to itemize your polling data and your voter registration information so it's easily accessible to your elections boards, because that's what you need. You need something where you can point and click, and then you have a bunch of information at your fingertips. That's what this software does. But it doesn't come with, it's not inherent to the software that it has a protection. You have to then pay for a protection. And a lot of times with corporations, at least, they don't pay for protections. They download the software that makes their lives easier, but they don't download the protections and pay for that on top of it that would protect that information. So I would assume that elections in any one of these 9,000 different election boards, that they might not have the protections that they need. They might have not paid the $50,000 or the $100,000 it would take. And these are inflated numbers that I'm assuming because of the scope of what they're covering, that they would need to protect that. Now, that's really stupid. That's another thing you need to bring up with your elections boards, and the reason why you have to call on the local level and not just on the federal level. You need to find out why. Why are they Scooby-Dooing this? These are our elections. This is not something to play around with.
Well, certainly not. And gosh, we're all getting an education about it now. And like you said, 2018 is going to be right around the corner. So how much can really get done between now and then?
Well, we need to start.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not one of those defeatists, and I know you're not either. We need to, if it's going to take a year to fix it, then we better start now. We're already, maybe 9 or 10 months away from a next election. So, and I'm really bad at math, so don't quote me on that, but you know what I mean? We need to get started right now. This information has been in the news and it's been covered, but I don't think enough. And so, I wanted to come on this show to talk to your listeners. Anybody listening, seriously, this has nothing to do with partisanship. This has nothing to do with how I feel about Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders or Russia or Donald Trump. This is our election system. I seriously, like you, care about our democracy, care about the integrity of our democracy, and I am contacting my state representatives asking them what the hell is going on, and my federal representatives asking them the same question. And I would implore you to do the same thing. Please ask them, what the hell is going on? Are they secure? Do you have the security that you need? Do you have the software that you need? Have you tested it? Has it been stress tested? The voter registration, has there been any information of flipping going on? Have you been cooperating with the FBI or the DHS when they've been asking you about this? Or are you hiding that information? For what cause? Are you embarrassed that maybe you got screwed over and you don't want anybody to know about it? Who cares about your embarrassment? This is my democracy. Tell me. Because I want to fix the problem. We can deal with your inadequacies later. But we've got elections coming up. We need to deal with the problem now. And, of course, find out whether or not you are registered in the right party. Whatever that party is. Check it out. Because if you're not, you need to do something about that right now. And not just do it and forget about it. I would check up on it every 3 or 4 months until the election. Make sure that it's correct. And make sure that your last check affords you enough time to make sure that that change is made if it all of a sudden flips right before the vote. Keep up on it. Pretend it's your bank account information and you have to pay your rent in a couple of days. You're waiting for a check to clear. Check it like that.
Check it like that, because we're all living paycheck to paycheck. I mean, that's for sure. Well, most of us are, and most of us don't. You know, we kind of like just take it for granted that these things are safe. And I'm going to go. I mean, I think for myself, in Virginia, you can actually vote in either. So I don't think flipping would work in Virginia. But so many other states, you have to vote along party lines. And if you get flipped like that, then you're amazing. Amazing, because Bernie Sanders had so much support, and it was so unbelievable that he didn't get it. And like you said, that sentiment of, well, everybody blamed Hillary and everybody hated Hillary for it because they wanted Bernie. So, wow, that's mind-blowing. In the last 20 minutes, just for my own curiosity's sake, I would like to get your opinion on what you think is going to happen from now on, how this is going to play out in terms of consequences or lack thereof for Trump.
Well, I would defer to what Jay Johnson, the former director of the DHS, said to the Senate Intelligence Committee when he was asked that same question. He said they will, of course, be back. There's no reason for them not to be. There is so much writing. Think about what's happening right now. We have Trump Care Turtle Edition, which is not a health care bill. It's not only a tax write-off for the millionaires and billionaires. It's a death panel. People will die if this goes through. Not right away, but over the next 10 years. And over the next 10 years, they want to phase out Medicaid completely. And it's easier for them if those people die off. I was watching The Last Word with Lawrence O'Donnell last night, and Ari Mueller was sitting in for him, and they had a gentleman who was part of a group called ADAPT. This group started in the 1970s. They just wanted to ride the bus. And since they're taxpayers, they wanted these buses to be equipped with apparatus to be able to get them on the bus. They wanted to be able to use it since they were paying for it. Nobody wanted to help the disabled get on a friggin' bus. So they laid themselves out in the street in Colorado. And they did that for days. And the cops, they were concerned. They didn't want to actually move them because they're disabled, because they got out of their wheelchairs and they were laying on the ground. Because you have to move someone who's disabled in a certain way. Otherwise, you could break their bones. Their muscles are very fragile, especially the areas where if they're a paraplegic, they haven't used that in a long time. You could really seriously hurt them. So they acquiesced. And it wasn't until a decade later, under President George Bush Sr., that we made into federal law the Disabilities Act that gave them the ability to do things like ride a friggin' bus that they pay taxes for. 10 years they did these demonstrations. Well, the same group sat in McConnell's office when he unveiled Trump Care Turtle Edition. And, you know, today's officers on Capitol Hill had no problem picking them up and twisting them and dragging them out. Really? A person in a wheelchair is a threat? There was a picture of a woman who's fully in a wheelchair. She almost has no use of her body whatsoever. And she needs help not only to care for herself, but for her daughter, who doesn't have any problems. And they had her zip tied. Really? Really, a woman in a wheelchair who has very little use of her entire body needs to have her arms zip tied behind her back? She's a threat? What happened from the 1970s when the cops were worried about the PR travesty that would ensue if they were caught on camera and published in the newspaper, had pictures of them picking these people up and possibly abusing them or possibly hurting them? Today, those guys had no problem doing that. Get those guys right out of Mitch McConnell's office. Get them out of here. Well, they had, on the last word last night, one of the gentlemen who was there. And this man, and this is something we forget, this man is fully functioning. His brain is fine. It's just his body won't cooperate. And he's fully incapacitated. He needs 24-hour care. But he has a life. He goes out. He has friends. He even had a girlfriend. He just broke up with her. We make concessions for Steve Hawking, whose body is completely, it's not working. And yet we make concessions because we recognize, not to quote the movie, but the beautiful mind that is within that body. Well, what about this kid in Florida who was part of ADAPT, who was arrested and thrown out of Mitch McConnell's office? Does he not matter? Because the statement that he wrote and was read on air was beautiful, and it was heartfelt, and it was something maybe my son would have said. There's a real person inside that body. Just because his body doesn't work right or it doesn't look like it should doesn't mean there's not a real person with thoughts and feelings and aspirations just like you. It's just they're trapped. So we should kill them off? Paul Ryan says that he's been talking about cutting Medicaid since he was in college. What kind of monster animal is he? We're talking about human beings that are alive, that have thoughts and feelings. If it's okay that we celebrate Stephen Hawking while his body doesn't work and recognize his beautiful mind, why can't we recognize the beautiful mind in that man in Florida and save his life? It's disgusting.
Yeah, it is. It's incomprehensible. The level of basically no conscience that must be involved in making those types of decisions. I don't understand it. I don't understand it at all. And how it's supported, how people support that is beyond me.
In Georgia, Karen Handel says, I don't support a living wage. I'm not like that crazy liberal John Ossoff who supports a living wage. It's on camera. She said it during a debate just to go against John. And she was voted in. I understand, because if you watch football, you get the idea of loyalty. And I understand that in our world, there's a lot of partisanship and people are really loyal to their party to the extent that they demonize the other side. The other side's like some people think they're real demons, but that's on the darkest parts of the internet. I understand that idea, that concept, but in Kentucky, where the majority of the people who are on state assistance, Medicaid, the expansion, they are white. And yet Rand Paul sat on Morning Joe a couple of days ago and said, if you can't afford it, you shouldn't have it. Well, that's how the marketplace works. And we can save a lot of money by putting a bill in, and he thinks that the turtleneck Trump care that's out there now is too light. He thinks it should go farther. He wants those people to die because then we don't have to spend the money to keep them alive. We could put that money other places, like in the pockets of the millionaires and billionaires where it belongs, right? This is a representative of Kentucky whose constituents, majority of them are on that, and that is their only source of health care. And he's saying that. He is not only misrepresenting his constituents, but there's something fundamentally wrong with a person who speaks that way about other human beings, because he wouldn't speak that way about his wife. He wouldn't speak that way about his mother-in-law. He wouldn't speak that way about his son-in-law. He wouldn't speak that way about his third cousin. But if it's you, who cares? Because we could save a lot of money if you're gone. Then we don't have to worry about Medicaid. Then we don't have to worry about sending all these subsidies out for people who just don't work hard enough. Now, I come from a working class family. I'm a working woman. I own my own business. We work. I don't, if anything seriously happened to me or my husband, we couldn't afford it. And yet we're working and we're supporting our 2 kids. And I'm just like you.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand. And I know that I am important to my family just like you are. And if something happened to me, my family would be devastated just like yours would be if something happened to you. And maybe you are the breadwinner in the family, and it would not only devastate them emotionally, but they would be financially and economically strapped, gone if something happened to you.
There's that story.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
That story that came out about one of Trump's, one of his advisors or somebody that was working for Trump that has gone bankrupt because of a single illness that his wife had. And yet, so even his own staff is experiencing this broken so-called healthcare system that we have. There's this meme that's floating around out there that it's these liberals that don't want to pay for services rendered. So their argument is that liberals don't want healthcare workers to get paid. No. That's not what the argument is. For myself, I don't want insurance companies as part of this healthcare system anymore. That's where the money's going. It's not that it cost $10,000 for a simple medical procedure. That simple medical procedure probably really only costs $3,000, but the rest is going to insurance. So that's what I want people to understand, is that our system doesn't even have to be as expensive as it is. And it is not, by a long shot, the best system in the world for healthcare, because it's set up for us not to have good outcomes. It's just a money-making operation. And so this whole argument that people want healthcare for free, no, people don't want to die. And we're supposed to be living in a society that's civilized. And in a civilized society, we don't let babies and old people and people with disabilities die simply because their babies are old, or, we take care of everyone. That's what a civilized society is supposed to be. So this "you're on your own" attitude is a little bit uncivilized, in my opinion.
I agree with you. 49% of the babies born are born with Medicaid's assistance or paid for completely. Yeah. Well, what are we going to do with we're talking about real people. The pro-lifers, they should be up in arms about this, because those babies are in jeopardy as soon as they come out of the womb, if they are able to come out successfully at all, because maybe the mother couldn't afford the prenatal care.
Yeah.
Think about this. We all get sick and we all die. Now, it's unfortunate that to go into another matter, the opioid addiction in Kentucky, it's out of control. And in that same interview that I was just talking about, Rand Paul on Morning Joe, he has someone in his family who is recovering from opioid addiction. And yet he is for deeper cuts to Medicaid. Well, Medicaid funds the majority of opioid addiction therapy in this country. What's going to happen to them? You know what he says? He says, we don't have to fund those therapies. What we need to do is get information into the schools to prevent it from ever happening. Well, yeah, duh. That's called parenting. I get that. We have problems in this country with that. But there's a really big problem with parenting when mommy and daddy are on opiates. Mm-hmm. And they don't have any therapy to go to, and nobody's going to pay for them to get off of it so they could tell their kids, don't do it. You can't put the cart before the horse. You have to help people. There's nothing about helping people. There's no humanity. They have a fundamental inability to empathize with people. And that is a human trait that we should demand in our representatives, because they're representing a large group of people who have diverse ideas, but they have to at least give a care about whether or not they live or die. That just has to be fundamentally there before they can tackle tax reform and the economy and whatever. They have to fundamentally care about whether or not their constituents live or die. Right now, they don't on one side of the aisle. That is evident. That should concern you, because everyone listening eventually will get sick and die. And if it's sooner than you think, you're in trouble if this passes. And if you think it won't pass, you're wrong.
Right. Wow. Yeah. Incredible.
It's up to us to save our own lives at this point. We need to bug our congressmen on the state and federal level to the point where they just refuse to vote for it, and Mitch McConnell is forced into a shell.
Where he belongs.
Where he belongs.
Yeah. That's our time's almost up. We have about 3 more minutes. So if there are any other ideas that you wanted to get to, anything you want to get out there, now's the time.
Well, just remember, the elections were not hacked with the votes that you made. They were hacked with your voter registration. So call your Board of Elections. Make sure that your voter registration is what your paperwork at home says it is, and keep checking on it and making sure. And call them also on the point of what they're doing to make sure that Russia isn't able to do this to you again. Or do it the first time. If there was nothing wrong the first time, they might come back and do it again. Call and find out and force them to secure our votes, because we've got elections coming up. And with the healthcare bill, if you are a human who has empathy toward anything other than yourself and knows anybody who gets sick or assumes that you will get sick and die someday, then please call on the state and federal level and talk to your governor and your representatives and the lawmakers. Talk to them, call them, email them, show up, bring them some muffins and some balloons and make it jovial, but get it through their thick skulls that you are not willing to die so the millionaires and billionaires can get $1 trillion tax break. You're just not going to pay for it with your life. That's just the end of it.
They've had enough. And there's enough lives lost to their pocket lining. There's enough. We've had enough. Yes. And it's so overwhelming because they're coming at us from all angles. I mean, the psychopaths in charge I think they're really trying to overwhelm us. Like, they're destroying our environment. They've destroyed our healthcare system. They have us eating poisoned processed food, and then going to the doctors to help us with that. And then the doctors put us on opioids and we get addicted to them. There's a lot, but each of us can do one thing every day. Just pick one thing. Today, I'm going to call my representative. That's going to be what I'm going to do to exercise my individual power today. Or today, I'm going to go out and talk to people about pipelines. Whatever it is that you choose to do, you have a lot more personal power than you think. Turn the TV off. Go outside. Talk to your neighbors. Talk to your friends about the things that concern you. Educate yourself. And don't believe the hype. Believe the facts.
It's not a spectator sport. If anything, the nightmare on Pennsylvania Avenue has taught us that this democracy that we have, we need to fight for it. We know that we are worth something, and we need to make it known to the people that we elect. And we need to elect people of integrity and not just go with the guy or gal who's cute, and not just go again with party line. We have to be human about our decisions.
Thank you so much, Susanne. Thank you, listeners. Thank you, everybody who helped out behind the scenes.